You couldn't have asked for the first round of the NFL draft to go any better for the Chicago Bears. You got a dynamic young receiver to pair with your new franchise quarterback, and 31 other teams should be jealous of what Ryan Poles was able to accomplish.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on X at CoxSports1. And you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on all of your favorite social media platforms, including the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. Terms and conditions apply. On the show today, we look at an exciting first round for your Chicago Bears, the pairing of Rome Odunze with Caleb Williams. And we'll hear from Bears general manager Ryan Poles about how nervous he was about Rome Odunze maybe not making it to 9, considering the possibility of trading up from 9 to get him, but ultimately staying put and landing the receiver they really wanted to pair with Caleb Williams. We'll also dive into what can make Caleb Williams successful in Chicago in ways that previous highly drafted rookie quarterbacks were not. What that takes from Caleb's perspective and also from what the Chicago Bears have to do for Caleb to help him be successful. And then we'll wrap up kind of looking at where things go from here, not only previewing day 2 and day 3 of the draft, but also what the Bears can still do when, okay, they addressed quarterback and receiver, but now still need to address defensive line in some capacity and a couple other spots in this draft you'd like to do something about, but clearly putting the priority on the offensive side of the ball and around the quarterback position. We knew Caleb would be the pick throughout this process here. It wasn't a surprise at number 1. So I want to start with number 9 because that's really where the draft got interesting for us on what Ryan Poles was going to do there. You know, as the draft board played it out, 3 quarterbacks go in a row, then a couple of wide receivers go in a row, and I guess it goes wide receiver, offensive tackle, wide receiver. Okay, and then we get the biggest wild card of the whole draft with Michael Penix to the Falcons right before the Bears pick, and you're like, holy, you're still like recovering from that pick coming in, and then you realize, wait a minute, Rome Odunze is still on the board. The Bears pull the trigger, get the speedy Washington wide receiver to be really not just a piece for Caleb Williams this year, but a piece for the next 10 years, right? This is the kind of quarterback wide receiver duo you can envision like setting career franchise records here because they're not that high anyway, that if both of these players get a second, play through the rookie deal and then get a second contract in Chicago, then you should have your franchise's all-time leading passer and your franchise's all-time leading receiver in those 2 players. They don't even have to be Hall of Famers. They don't have to be Pro Bowlers every year. If they just play here for 10 years, they're going to be the franchise record-setting players. Like that's the kind of foundation Ryan Poles is starting here with these 2 picks to pair these 2 guys together here. And it came close to not happening this way. Ryan Poles was nervous about how this was going to all play out and ultimately had to be patient and let it play out. But I thought he gave a couple of good anecdotes explaining how the process went for them during the first day of the draft coming up to the number 9 overall pick.
I'd go back one step. It wasn't so much like a specific position group. The players, like I told you the other day, Ian and I sequenced the board out all the way across, and Rome was extremely high on that list. That's why I was nervous that he wasn't going to be there at 9. Our simulations, it was about a 50-50 shot if he was going to be there. But as it started to unfold, Ian had to hold me back from not trying to trade up and do something crazy to get him. But it ended up working out really well.
Ryan Poles said they felt pretty good about Odunze making it there. Once they got to about the Titans at the 7th pick, I don't think they seemed to be pretty confident that the Falcons were not going to take a wide receiver. And so once J.C. Latham went to the Titans at 7, then they were like, all right, were good to go and didn't think they were going to necessarily get jumped for a wide receiver at that point. So the nerves only lasted so long, but clearly Poles getting excited there and needing assistant general manager Ian Cunningham to maybe kind of keep him grounded from wanting to move up and go get Odunze to make sure they land it with him. But like, to me, it really is everything you could have hoped for on draft day, about as close to a best case scenario. Maybe not the exact order of picks. I'm sure like Marvin Harrison Jr., whoever had fallen, but as far as like realistically how the first 8 picks could have gone, like this played out very nicely for the Bears. And I love the way that Rome Odunze fits into what the Bears have at wide receiver right now. That I think Odunze compared to Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr., well, I think Odunze is a good route runner. I think of the 3, he is the least polished in that department. He's got the kind of rare size speed combination where he is going to be faster than most players in the field and bigger than most players trying to defend him. Like rarely you can have a cornerback that's both big enough and fast enough. Most cornerbacks, like he might face cornerbacks who are as fast as he is or faster, but those cornerbacks aren't going to be as big as he is. And he might face cornerbacks that are as big as he is, but those bigger cornerbacks are not going to be as fast as he is. So he represents a mismatch almost anywhere he is on the field. But there's some of them a little more nuances to route running and little like veteran technical things that he just wasn't necessarily asked to do at Washington. And I don't know that at Washington, like the route tree in terms of the different routes they asked him to run was not perhaps as robust as what Malik Neighbors did at LSU, for example. Like there's a reason Rome Odunze was the 3rd wide receiver off the board, even though perhaps in a different draft class he could have been the 1st wide receiver off the board, if not for having these 2 great players here. But coming to Chicago with Keenan Allen and with DJ Moore allows him to still get playing time and be a contributor as a rookie and a productive one at that, but not have to be everything for this offense all at once. He doesn't need to step in and be that alpha number 1 receiver right now, the way, say, Marvin Harrison might have to with the Arizona Cardinals, or even, I think, in New York with Malik Neighbors going there. Like, those guys are going to have to be the top option right away, thrown in the fire. You got to be a 1,000-yard guy for us right now. And in Chicago, Odunze can learn from 2 of the most savvy, technically sound route running veteran receivers in the NFL. Like I think that's the ideal mentor program for a young receiver to come into, to have, especially Keenan Allen, but DJ Moore as well, as just 2 guys that are technicians at getting open. And that's just something that you just learn from experience and from adjusting in the NFL, that not every rookie wide receiver comes into a situation like that. And of course, then you add just the raw talent that Rome Odunze has to the talent of 2,000-yard receivers there. And Caleb Williams has one of the best receiving cores in the NFL, period, now at this point. Certainly one of the best supporting casts in the NFL, period, when you include the 2 tight ends and the backfield there. Like, I'm not here to do a power ranking of every team's wide receiving core, but like, you cannot ask for anything better than this in terms of weapons for your rookie quarterback to come into. I rarely, if ever, have you ever seen a rookie quarterback come to a team that has a top 10 pick at wide receiver, plus 2,000-yard veteran receivers, plus 2 tight ends that have been dynamic pass catchers, plus a backfield with multiple loaded backs. Like, sure, we can certainly have concerns about the offensive line, but the offensive line is not bad. It's just a matter of whether it's good or more like average. But this is absolutely setting up Caleb Williams great, and it makes a great pairing of those 2 picks at the top of the draft, and you can figure out everything else out later. I do want to talk about that process of figuring everything else out later, but I want to make sure we don't just glaze over Caleb Williams either, and address kind of I don't think it's an elephant in the room, but this idea, right, is like, we've been through this before. The rookie quarterback comes in as the savior of the franchise, and Mitch and Justin were not the saviors of the franchise, so why are we supposed to believe Caleb Williams is? And I think there's some specific things about this pick and about this player and about this situation that make it easier to believe again, and maybe get your heart broken again, but at least open your heart up for love of another franchise quarterback. We'll hear from Ryan Poles and his perspective on that sort of broken QB cycle as well next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because they have all the tools you need to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. The key is LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but, might be open if the role is right for them. Like in a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing a bunch of hats and you always have so much on your plate. You don't always have the time and resources to hire, but they make it so much easier. They even have a feature that helps you write job descriptions so you can get the right people for your job quick and easy and get back to what makes your business great. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
This episode of your favorite Locked On podcast is brought to you by the best meal kit service in the game, Home Chef. No more having to answer the dreaded question, what are we going to do for dinner tonight? Thanks to Home Chef and their chef-designed recipes that are delivered directly to my door, all pre-packaged, pre-portioned. They even peel the garlic cloves for you. And each recipe, one of my favorites, blackened mahi, comes with a full page of easy-to-read instructions that include customization options and pictures to guide you along the way through the step-by-step process so you don't have to ask, is that what chard looks like? I cannot recommend Home Chef enough, especially right now, because for a limited time, Home Chef is giving Locked On listeners 18 free meals, free dessert for life, and of course, free shipping on your first box if you head to homechef.com/lockedon today. That's homechef.com/lockedon for 18 free meals and free dessert for life. Yes, you heard that right. Homechef.com/lockedon. Must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert.
Now is definitely the time to celebrate, to soak it all in and absorb the moment of, wow, the Bears have their next franchise quarterback. The Bears really did it's kind of a pinch yourself thing, right? Like, it sounds stupid to say it out loud, but like, the Bears really did get the number 1 overall pick again and get the top quarterback in the draft and get the quarterback that all the other quarterback needy teams wanted and would have preferred and would have taken had they had the opportunity to get them. Like, that exact set of circumstances there has not happened, I was going to say, in Chicago Bears history, certainly in my lifetime and probably yours as well. Like, yes, the Bears have taken the first quarterback in the draft before, in Mitch Trubisky and I think in others. And certainly the Bears have taken quarterbacks like Justin Fields that other quarterback needy teams were interested in, but never has it been the top undisputed quarterback that no one really is refuting at the top of it. Like, sure, there are some people. The word I was looking for was unanimous. That was the word I was struggling to find in that process. But like, yeah, if the occasional person might say, well, I slightly prefer Drake May or whatever, but like, this is not a quarterback pick that you can ever look back in hindsight and say, man, the Bears should have done something differently, right? Like, even if for some reason something doesn't work out with Caleb Williams, no one is going to look back and go, man, the Bears should have known and should have taken this other player, right? It's like, no, any team that was in the Bears' shoes here, any general manager, any scout, any evaluator is taking Caleb Williams for their team. And it's up then to the Chicago Bears to make sure that this does work and that this isn't like the other quarterback failings have had in Chicago. After he was picked, Caleb Williams was asked about that. Like, are you aware of kind of the Bears quarterback history here and, the sort of the failures they've had? And he's like, yeah, I asked them about, like, he asked Ryan Poles, he asked Matt Eberflus, like, why is that keep happening here? And how are you going to make sure that doesn't happen with me? And what is that going to look like? And they were very meticulous about, showing him their vision for him and not just telling him, but like showing him how they operate and how things are different now and how the steps they're taking to ensure success. But this idea, I feel like throughout this process has been on the back of Bears fans' minds of like, man, but like, am I ready to fall in love with another quarterback and risk it not working out. And I think there's so many reasons to believe that things are different with Caleb Williams than they were with Mitch Trubisky and with Justin Fields and with, Rex Grossman and all the different quarterbacks before him. In terms of both the X's and O's evaluation of Caleb Williams versus those guys, and also just like the overall talent in the draft class and where he sort of ranks and the sort of perception among other team, the wisdom of the crowd in that sense, but then also what he's coming into in the Chicago Bears. Now with Rome Odunze and Keenan Allen and DJ Moore and everything we just talked about with the supporting cast around him, like he's coming into one of the best situations you could ever hope for one of these young quarterbacks to come into. And that's the biggest difference between him and Trubisky and Fields and these past quarterbacks is Mitch did not come into a great team his first year. Justin did not come into a great team, did not come into the right regime for those quarterbacks to be successful, and they were really put in a bad position from the very start. Doesn't mean everything's going to be perfect for Caleb, but it does feel like the foundation is much better. He's starting from a much better place, and that doesn't guarantee success, but it does give you more confidence that things can be different this time. And certainly Ryan Poles understands that and understands that pressure and has been very conscious of that throughout this process. So I wanted to play for you his answer to a question about this at his press conference that I think kind of shows you their line of thinking and how they're approaching this as an organization.
You see all the talent, that's obvious. You see what he brings to the table. On your end, how do you make sure that the Bears get this right?
Yeah, that's a great question. One, the infrastructure has to be there, and I think we've done that part to have the talent around our quarterback now. I think the other thing is it's going to be our entire organization is going to have to be on the same page on how we handle this, how we develop Caleb. But I'll also say that I think we have a really good approach with all of the players. And I think that's different than maybe it was in the past. The way that we take it really serious in terms of the development from a nutritional standpoint to performance, to mental skills, to how our coaches teach. Like, I think we've made some really good strides there. But it's going to take everybody, and everyone's got to be on the same page. We got to adjust to strengths and weaknesses that the player has.
Poles' comments take me back to something we talked about back in January as we sort of started this quarterback process with Caleb and with Justin Fields at the time, and like looking at this offseason, right? Like Ryan Poles talks about the coaching, right, and the teaching and the development, and not only the infrastructure of having the good players around him that we've already talked about, but like how much the success of Caleb Williams will be dependent on Matt Eberflus, Shane Waldron, Thomas Brown, Kerry Joseph, this offensive coaching staff. And that to me is like the critical factor here. I think we all feel pretty darn confident in, at the very least, the weapons around Caleb Williams, if not the whole offense around Caleb. So you can have we can debate how confident you are in the offensive line, but I don't think anyone is doubting the receivers, the tight ends, the running backs. Like the weapons Caleb Williams has to throw to, we're all good with. The offensive line, we can debate that, but it's not done. It's still a work in progress there. And the defense, et cetera. But like when the Bears were going through this coaching decision this offseason, like that's what we said in the podcast, like who the offensive coordinator and head coach decision this offseason was gonna matter. It was always gonna matter more than the quarterback decision, because whether it was gonna be Caleb or Justin, and now that we know it's Caleb, like he can only go so far as the coaching he receives. If Shane Waldron is an average, it needs to at least be an average offensive coordinator, then Caleb Williams can be fine. But if Shane Waldron somehow turns out to be a bad offensive coordinator, if he turns out to be what Luke Getsy ended up being, right? We thought Luke Getsy was going to be great, and it didn't pan out that way. Or, certainly Matt Nagy before him, or Dowell Loggins with Mitch Trubisky, right? Like that is what can be so detrimental to a quarterback. And that's what Ryan Poles is banking on, right? Teaching, development, learning, coaching. Like that's him saying our coaches are going to be what makes Caleb Williams not a failure like some of the other previous quarterbacks have been in Chicago. And like that's what they're banking on. And that's why I thought the head coaching and offensive coordinator decision was so critical, because that's what it's going to come down to. And Ryan Poles is convinced that these are the right coaches and the right staff to do it. They certainly deserve the opportunity to show that and to prove that, and the benefit of the doubt until they show otherwise. But that's what's going to be so critical for Caleb. Is this coaching staff correct for him. And then, of course, you also would like to continue to improve the offensive line, continue to improve the defense, and continue to get a good team around him. But like the coaching is going to matter so much more. Can he overcome lesser coaching? I mean, I guess, okay, if the coaching staff is bad and you fire him after a year and then get another coach, I mean, and then that just becomes messy, and then we're in the same cycle you were with the quarterbacks before, right? Like, that's what happened to Justin Fields. That's what happened to Mitch Trubisky. But with both of them, it was bad coaching and bad players. I think with Caleb, we feel pretty darn good about the players, and now we need the coaching box to really come through, be checked, and give us that confidence that, yep, he's got everything. And that's when you can really, truly have that faith of like, wow, this is real. Let's enjoy it. Let's be all in. Let's fall in love again. Buy your number 18 Caleb Williams jerseys. And I think that I see number 15 Rome Odunze jerseys is what the numbers that they're going to be starting out with for their rookie career. So let's get excited because the Caleb Williams era is officially here. And the draft is not done either. Ryan Poles is not done adding to this team. There are still other needs that they weren't able to address with the 1st and 9th pick in this draft. And whether they're going to address it still in the draft or beyond, I kind of want to look at what's next for this Bears roster, not just in terms of the picks they're going to make on day 2 and day 3, but beyond what this team's going to then look like when you shape up a 53-man roster and head into training camp, a 90-man roster in training camp. So we'll look at kind of what needs remain and what options the Bears have to address them next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Monopoly Go. If there's one thing we've learned through this pre-draft process, it's that Caleb Williams is a competitive person with a competitive side. And I would imagine a competitive person like Caleb Williams would absolutely love Monopoly Go. It's been downloaded over 150 million times, just like regular Monopoly, but with a twist. You play on not one, but hundreds of different Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part is being able to tap into that competitive side and compete against your friends. Of course, just like in classic Monopoly, you can charge them rent on your iconic properties all over the board, but you can also heist their bank vaults to get riches for yourself. And they've got leaderboards that show you who the biggest Monopoly tycoon really is. But it's not just your competitive side that's going to love it. You can also team up with friends and people all around the world in timed tournaments and earn huge rewards. So get in on the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. We knew entering this draft that Ryan Poles can only do so much. With the first pick, the 9th pick, the 75th pick, and the 4th round pick, 112 or 122. I think it's 112. But anyway, that the 9th pick was kind of your one opportunity to add a surefire, bona fide starter, stud player at one position. And you had multiple positions in this draft that ideally you would like to add surefire, bona fide top 10 stud players, right? We knew one way or another the Bears could get a bona fide stud wide receiver like Rome Odunze, which they did, and I don't think you're finding anybody too upset about that. But there was also the possibility of trying to get a bona fide stud defensive end to pair with Montez Sweat, or a bona fide stud interior defensive tackle pass rusher to also, I guess, pair with Montez Sweat and to pair with Gervon Dexter and be more disruptive on the interior. And by going with Odunze, that means you don't go with either of those spots. I guess you could also include an offensive tackle in there as a possibility at the 9th pick. Like, we talked about how you're going to have to pick one of those paths. One position is going to get that really premium investment of the 9th pick. And then what out of the rest of those positions, what you don't take with the 9th pick, you got to try and piece together elsewhere. And so now we know wide receiver has that premium investment. And it's one we're all excited about and glad for. But now, okay, what do you do about your pass rush? Because, you still look at your defensive line and your depth chart there. If the Bears don't address defensive line in the draft at all, then your lineup right now is Montez Sweat and DeMarcus Walker as your 2 defensive ends, and Gervon Dexter and Andrew Billings as your 2 defensive tackles. And I suppose that's not horrible, but you really don't have much depth beyond that. Zach Pickens on the interior, sure, great, want to keep seeing him develop. But then your number 3 defensive end is either Dominique Robinson or Jake Martin, who they brought in from the Colts. And they don't really have much else at defensive tackle. They had a couple of street free agents, Byron Cowart and Michael Dwumafor, but there's not really much else for talent to write home about. This is not a, top to bottom, not a complete NFL defensive line. This top to bottom, maybe on paper, I don't know, is worst in the NFL too strong? Bottom 5 defensive line in terms of like top to bottom talent there right now. Like this is not enough of a defensive line. You feel like you have to address it in some way, shape, or form. You would hope that, in the 3rd and 4th round here, that some kind of quality defensive lineman of some kind is available there. It doesn't necessarily have to specifically be a defensive end versus a defensive tackle. You don't want to sit there at 75 and just reach for whoever the best defensive end is because you just feel like, gosh, I have to get someone here, so I'm just going to take them, even if it's way too early for him, depending on how they sort of grade out their draft board. But maybe there's a defensive tackle who's a little higher, or vice versa. Maybe there's not really a tackle there that you like, but there's an end there. So, let's just take that defensive lineman. But even then, the 3rd round pick, 75th overall, you might get a player you like really well. Maybe another Washington player like Braylon Trice or Javon Solomon from Troy. You could even go small school like a Jalix Hunt from Houston Christian. There's a lot of more like a lot more like outside linebackery types there than like true, defensive end value there. But like, say you get even like Trice from Washington, who might go earlier than that, but say he's on the board, like that's great. And he can be a quality member of your defensive end rotation this year. But I don't think he's certainly not starting day 1 of training camp. He's not coming as the assumed starter. Like DeMarcus Walker is then still going to be your starter, even if you use your next highest draft pick on a defensive end. Like, unless for some reason someone crazy falls there, but I don't even think there's another player left on the board right now. I guess Marshawn Nealand from Western Michigan could maybe be that kind of Chris Braswell from Alabama, but like these guys are going to go in the mid to early 2nd round, I suppose. Ryan Poles could trade up from 75 to make sure he goes and gets one of these edge rushers, and not to overlook the defensive tackle class as well, because you could easily, at 75 get someone like Michael Hall from Ohio State, who I think would be is a consistent disruptive guy, or if somebody like Brandon Dorlus from Oregon falls down to that area, or heaven forbid Braden Fiskey fall that far, but I don't think he'll be around at that board. Like there are options here to address the defensive line, and I think ideally I'd love to use both of these picks on defensive line. 3rd round pick, get an edge rusher. 4th round pick, get a defensive tackle, and then I could feel like, okay, maybe everything's not amazing right now, but there's an investment there, and that those young players you're drafting now are going to keep developing and get better, and Javon Dexter is going to keep developing and get better, and Zach Pickens needs to take steps forward, and hopefully maybe DeMarcus Walker he started to have a stronger finish last season, but I don't want to be left in this situation where I'm trying to talk myself into what's left on the Chicago Bears defensive line. You know what I mean? I don't want a defensive line where it's like, maybe, I want a defensive line where it's like, yes, these guys are great. And then, of course, you can look to free agency, and there's a guy like Dwayne Smoots out there. Yannick Ngakoue is still a free agent. It's not really much in terms of the defensive tackle position out there, but there's a couple of edge rushers that might be guys who can contribute, even if they're not solving all of your problems. So, like, there's some ability to do so there, but this is kind of the problem we anticipated on the front end and don't have a solution. If you don't go defensive line in the 1st round, which is fine, you don't have to go defensive line in the 1st round. I'm glad they got Rome Odunze. I think that was the right pick given how the board played out. But now what? Like, now what do you do? How do you put together a pass rush that is consistent enough? Or do you get back into a point where Matt Eberflus has to blitz a bit more and, be more aggressive as a defensive coordinator and maybe sacrifice something on the back end in coverage? And, how does that play out? Like, it's just one of the many different dynamics of this defense. But I think we have such an assumption that, like, oh, this Bears defense is going to step in and instantly be top 5 again. And maybe they still can be, but it's not top to bottom the exact same defense it was last year. You've got a new starting safety. You've got some departures on the defensive line and no real additions that are going to be significant contributors on the defensive line. And you hope that everything can continue to plan out and that Montez Sweat is going to carry a lot of the load but for himself anyway, even without a great running mate on the other side. And maybe he is so good and great enough that you can get by. And if Javon Dexter takes a big step forward and Montez Sweat keeps doing Montez Sweat stuff, maybe you'll be fine. But I'd like to see how Ryan Poles still goes about approaching this, because we saw even last season, right? Like, the defensive line was a work in progress, even up to the trade deadline when they went and got Montez Sweat. And I imagine that may be the approach for that position this year. Let's see who gets cut down at the end of training camp in 53-man rosters and see if a pretty good player becomes available at some point during that stretch. And I don't think the Bears are going to trade for Trey Hendrickson from the Cincinnati Bengals, but like, maybe a player like that becomes available in a trade and the price tag becomes a little bit more affordable. Again, the Bengals are a team that is very stingy about trading talented players. And like I was talking to our Locked On Bengals host, and he's basically like, yeah, the Bengals might do it if you had traded them the 9th overall pick straight up, but like other than that, I was quite on the opposite. I was like, the Bears would never do it for the 9th overall pick straight up, but like maybe a pick swap or something. But like that's not going to happen. I just don't count on the Trey Hendrickson thing to be a realistic pathway for the Bears to upgrade defensive end. And I don't think Ryan Poles necessarily wants to go get another, trade draft capital for another player that also then wants more money on a contract that he just did that with Montez Sweat. But like there are pathways here. So I'm not here to say, oh man, the Bears pass rush is screwed at this point. It's more like, well, what's plan B here? Okay, it wasn't the 9th overall pick. That's fine. You got a great player instead. Super happy about it. Now what? What do you got for us, Ryan Poles? Same thing, for the long-term answers at center and at free safety. You'd like to draft developmental players there, developmental players at guard as well. Like, it would be ideal if you had picks. But I don't see Poles as a guy who's going to be super eager to trade down from 75 or 112 from that matter. Because if you're moving down in the 3rd round, you're going to gain a 6th or a 7th round pick. And in this draft class in particular, those aren't all that valuable. So like at this point, Poles could move up, but I'm not expecting a ton of trades. I think he may end up staying at all 4 picks without a single trade and just taking those 4 players at those 4 spots and saying, all right, got a good draft class here, and then sign a bunch of undrafted free agents and try and fill things out that way. So we'll see. The important thing is that the Bears got their quarterback and wide receiver of the future, of the franchise, like for the next decade is the plan here. And this is a great and exciting time to enjoy them. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how the Bears approached the first round here. How happy are you with Rome Odunze? Would you have gone somewhere else? Was this your dream scenario? Let us know in the comments here on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, or you can post in the Locked On Bears Facebook group, or you can tweet us at Locked On Bears. However you do it, make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis, including fully expecting to do a bonus Saturday podcast here after whatever the Bears do in that 3rd round, and then we'll have a podcast for you on Monday to break down the 4th round. We're going to talk to our friends from Locked On Washington Huskies next week to learn more about Rome Odunze and what he did in college. So lots more coming your way. Lots of reason to tune into Locked On Bears each and every day. And it also means lots of reasons for you to bear down.